So Jeremy Price is with us today. I think I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. I guess the first time I really remember meeting you was at the MSE show in Oklahoma last year.
Yep, that is correct.
Was there? Okay, all right. And then, so you came to the MSE show, and then you came to finals, and you were primarily competing those two events, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this year, somewhere in between, you decided to go all in and showed up at Mecca Judges Training along with your wife and I believe one or two other people from the Austin, Texas area where you're from. And then a week later, we were all in Austin where you brought in Travis Chin and Keith Turner to do an IASCA Judges Training there in Austin, where all of you went through there again, and I presume several others. I guess, first of all, what got you interested in kind of going into the judges event promotion side of things that rapidly?
Well, mostly I got tired of driving so much. I had spent like the entire fall in 2019 driving back and forth all over different shows, all over the place, and was like, you know what? There are no shows in Texas whatsoever, so we're going to have to do something different about that.
Texas is a big place. There should be
Right.
more shows than that, especially considering the amount of talent that's there.
Well, and like the only ones we have are like Heat Wave and stuff like that. Where there's no SQ. It's like it's a mess. It's hard, it's hard to do anything. I'm like, this is dumb. If I wanted SPL, I could do all kinds of things, but for SQ, there's just nothing here. So I just went about changing that. So now I don't have to drive so much.
There you go. Yeah, I just gotta find some more people to get involved so you can compete again.
Yeah, and I still have my cars and I'm still building them. Mostly, for me, for the promotion side of things it's good. I like competing and everything, but really it's about community and it's about getting people together to enjoy things and
Absolutely.
Show what they're doing. So my cars are mostly going to be demo things to show maybe new competitors. They just give them more. Sometimes the actual competitors aren't 100% available to be able to demo all the time. And some people are really good about it. Some people really don't. But just to have at every event, there'll be at least, a couple of cars that are wide open for demos all the time, so.
To compare some old blood to new blood, which I don't normally like to do, but in terms of that side of it, I think nowadays, especially, I like to view judging and judges more as coaches versus dictators.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as much of a, here I'm the ultimate authority and I am the end all judgment of sound, and here I am to tell you how you failed to meet that, versus, hey, here's where I'm coming from, here's what I'm hearing, and how can we use that to make your system sound better?
For sure.
I think that's more of the approach now, especially with doing multiple organizations. It takes away that we have the sound mentality and more of, hey, we have a lot of experience to bring to the table. We've done this for a while. We have a reference to bring to the table, and let's compare that to what you've done. And anybody doing this, for the most part, bringing their car in is there, I think, some of them are there just to win a trophy, but I think most are wanting to make it sound better. But going through multiple judges trainings recently from multiple organizations and then working to start promoting events at that level, and you already brought up community. What's your angle on what you're bringing to the Texas community with your desire to bring events there and judge? You already have a base there ready to go, but what drew you to competition in the first place, and where do you get your kicks off in doing both competing and offering the competitions?
Competition is something that I've been around a long time, and and it seems to be a common story these days. Like I did it way back when. Life happened, didn't do it for a long time, came back and was like, wow, where'd everything go, right? And I'm also in a different region now. I used to be up north where there was stuff all the time, and I came down here and I was so surprised that there just wasn't anything going on. Things had advanced so much in that time that I was gone that I just really wanted to, kind of figure out how things were and experiment with some things and whatever. And one of the best, always one of the best ways to make my stuff better back in the day was to take it and compete with it. That way you get lots of feedback and you hear all these things, and that's, you get different people's views on what's good and what's bad. So I started that from the competitor side. That's what I started with. I just basically started throwing things in the car and playing with them and figuring it out, and made about 5 different revisions of the the first system, and then went and built a whole other car and all this stuff, just fiddling around last year. Again, I started listening to the community and what people looked for. I stumbled across SQology mostly by accident and thought that it was really cool in that most all SQology events have some kind of community based thing. There's some kind of gathering or some kind of seminar or some kind of speaker, some kind of something that brings people some benefit without just being a show, right? So I thought that was really cool, and I'm a technical trainer, for it's about 50% of my job description, right? So that's kind of, it resonates with me, right? That would be doing that kind of stuff. So I just kind of took what I do and what I like to do, and that's help explain and share what I love with other people and bring that to what we'd like to do here. Another one of the things that I do professionally is, like I said, training, and building evaluations and building content around that kind of stuff. So on the promotion side, one thing I noticed is, for better or worse, one of the major complaints from competitors, whether it's, not saying anything one way or another, but one of the major complaints is differences in judging and differences in criteria and kind of how things are measured. And like, you go to one show and you score super high, and then you go to another show and your score, you haven't changed anything, or you go to a show one day and you get, run through and you get, this score, and then the next day it's the exact same judge and you haven't touched anything and it's a completely different score, right? So So I sought out trying to objectify that process as much as I could, which was going through the judges training and really driving home, getting it from the source, right? The heads of those organizations to get the essence of really exactly what we're looking for, and try and help train my crew here so that we're as consistent as we can possibly be across that process.
What'd you learn in that process of going through the judges trainings and finding the evaluation? I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years and gone through thousands of score sheets, and I don't think I've found the answer yet.
Well, what I learned is it's really hard. I learned that it's really hard because even if you approach it exactly the same way every time, you physically are different from day to day, right? And that's one of the inherent problems. There's ways to make it good, right? And there are good examples of it across the various orgs. Like, there are judges that on any given day will be within a few points of each other no matter what. Right. And trying to distill that process. And it's really about process. And being able to work with those folks, that are consistent and like, all right, I hear this, help me translate that to points.
Right.
You're figuring out what the weighting is. Like, I hear something wrong, here's what it is. How does that best translate into the points based on the scale we have? And sometimes it's some of the things, the more technical things, are pretty easy, right? But there are some things that are indeed somewhat subjective. But just, kind of minimizing that overall variance as much as we can is the goal. It is something it's never going to be perfect, but we can certainly strive to make it as good as we can be.
No, absolutely. And I think garnering the feedback is just as, if not more important than the score itself. I mean, obviously we're trying to score to the score sheet as much as, or the rule book as much as possible, and be consistent within that. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to, was the outcome appropriate car to car?
Right.
And we've talked about it before, but I think the next step is really figuring out a good way to have the data available to the competitor as to, in more minute detail, how they stacked up on that day. Not necessarily just their total score to score, because let's say in Mecca, for example, 2 70.5 cars both of them 70.5 points could sound completely different.
I probably do, right?
Yeah, right. So it's one of those things where, at least if I know, okay, well, I was above average for width compared to the other scores given by that judge, but my sub-bass tonality score was 20% lower than everybody else's. Then maybe at least I can take a look at that and see not just what my score sheet says, but how that compares to the scores given by other people. It's
right.
Depth is a great one, especially on the ASCA score sheet, because everybody kind of has continued to interpret that differently. And so one judge might give me a 10 on depth and another judge might give me a 4 on depth. And I see those two scores, maybe they come across for this in the same day. And I say, well, this judge, how are those two things so much different?
Right.
And I would agree with that, but at the same time, it would be the automatic assumption in our head is to say, well, the judge that gave me a 10 was right, and the judge that gave me 4 was incorrect, and the judge that gave me a 10 helped me win, and the judge that gave me a 4 helped me lose.
Right.
When the judge giving a 10, or I'm using a bad example because I'm maxing out the score already, but let's say it's a 8 versus a 4. The judge giving a 4, his or her highest might have been a 5, whereas the one giving me an 8, their highest might have been a 10.
Relative scale, basically.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Understanding where you fit in a more minute detail, I think is an important next step in how we make the scoring portion of it more valuable to the competitor. But having that feedback from multiple people, and I think we've both said it, plenty of times to plenty of competitors over the years, but one person tells you it,
yeah.
If 3 or 4 people tell you the same thing, then maybe regardless of what your personal bias is on the matter, maybe you need to take a look at it.
Right. And that's part of my philosophy for nearly everything, right? If I've got one data point that tells me a thing, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. If I've got 10 data points that say the same thing, then chances are we're getting closer to something that's the truth. You can talk to any 10 people and ask them about a specific event, and they're going to tell you 10 different versions of that story, but the common things between them are probably true.
Right. Obviously, you've been around car audio for more than a day or two, but as far as kind of looking at things from inside the wheelhouse in terms of the competition and the organization side of it. And, so many people, over the years why do I get last place in IASCA and first place in MECA or vice versa? And I can never win in IASCA, but then I can, slay in MECA or again, vice versa. In coming in through the judges trainings for both of them. And I would say that this year, you coming through this year on judges training isn't necessarily indicative of any great change, because Travis and Keith have both been involved in IASCA for a long time.
Right.
Obviously, everybody handling the MECA judges trainings has been doing that for a long time. So both IASCA and MECA are very they have their system down in how they want to approach judges training.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience in those two, and how would you contrast them and how they approached the judging?
At the root of it, they're both looking for good sounding cars, but they're honestly looking at approaching it slightly differently in that they look for essentially the same things but weight them slightly differently.
Okay.
So if your car is super technical, it's probably going to score better in IASCA. If it feels really good to listen to, it's probably going to score good in MECA, right? They're just a little bit different in their focus from what I've seen. Like all the same elements are there, right? Tonality is there, and imaging is there, placement's there, all that. There's more space on the IASCA sheet for technical bits to take a little more precedence, and the MECA sheet is more like I would say it's like the performer's sheet, right, where it's more about the dynamics and impact and feeling and those kinds of things. There's more weight to that in that sheet. So even though they're measuring the same things, they're putting different relative weights in different places. So if your vehicle is built toward one sheet, then it may lose some points in the other, right? And I mean, if you built the car that does everything, I would love to see it, and because I want to hear it, right? But then fine, you'll score great in both. But there are always, as a competitor, there are trade-offs, right? Sometimes that, and some people do, and some people score well in both, and that's awesome. But if you bias your tuning or build or sound, right, to one set of criteria at the expense of others, that's where you see those differences.
Absolutely. And I think too, Iasca is a little bit more the overall approach from ground up, not necessarily just the score sheet or just how it's judged, but the theory behind it. I feel Iasca lives more in the theory, and Mecha lives more in the experiential,
the visceral element, right, of the sound, right?
Mecha overall just kind of approaches things from a more level of experience in terms of how I experience the sound, and Iasca seems more theoretic in this is how the sound should be, I guess, if that makes sense, in my opinion.
Yep. No, I would agree with that as well. Like I said, it's just a little more of a music theory versus music practice.
Right. Right. The guy who shows up and has incredible talent and is able to play their instrument and sing into a mic on a smoky bar stage all night, versus the first violinist in a philharmonic. They're both music. They're both approaching things in a very similar way. Good music is good music, right? But I absolutely agree. It's approaching it from a slightly different angle, and I think Mecha 2, it's one of those things where, hey, let's crank it. I'm not saying Mecha is inherently loud or Iasca is inherently quiet, but I do think that the systems that perform at a level and are tuned at a level when it's cranked up a little bit are going to perform better in Mecha, and the systems that are more tamed and maybe listening at the home audio or
the ideal 90 dB live, kind of
live jazz session type level is going to be more in the Iasca realm.
Yeah, you can definitely pick up a lot of points in Mecha if it can take the power. If it gets loud, and still sounds good, you can definitely pick up some points there and for dynamics and whatnot. But both approaches are good. They're just slightly different, right?
I think that explains, if you take, everybody likes to use ice skating as an example for a comparison, but I would say, like livestock judging or doing 4-H or stuff like that is kind of a little bit more appropriate in that a lot of times, knowing the judge going into those situations, you kind of fit for the judge in that scenario. And I would say in this case, if you, again, like you said, if your system does everything and is able to perform on all those levels, great. If not, maybe, think about what you're approaching a little bit and follow and learn on what's happening with the different organizations and judges that you're regularly competing with, and be able to kind of play the system to work into that, because everybody has their little bit of preference. Everybody hears a little bit differently. Everybody's body shape is different. There's a lot of things to consider in that. And, at the end of the day, I think it's appropriate that RTA competing on the RTA is kind of fallen off the wayside. And for all its imperfections, people continue to gravitate towards sound quality judging for all its imperfections. I think there's a reason for that, in that there is a little bit of a playing the odds. There is a little bit of a gamble to it. There is a little bit of a unknown, and that's kind of exciting.
Right.
But taking the time to understand the feedback from every judge that you has the opportunity to listen to your car, and gain from that to use that to then compete at a higher level, is always going to pay dividends.
Sure.
Simply saying that, well, it sounds good to me, isn't playing the game.
Right.
And you're not really going to grow in that, because you're not experimenting into different things. You're not experiencing new things. everybody that is doing this is doing it for a reason, and they have passion and they have experience behind it, and they have a reason they're saying what they're saying. So for the most part, I think we can all learn from each other. It's just a matter of being able to take that and process it and then use it to actually become better.
Right. And yeah, the biggest thing, with an approach to judging for sure is like, you don't want to ever like, oh, this thing's terrible and this is all the reasons why. Like that's not, you don't want to be scolding somebody for putting something together and bringing it out for you to listen to it. Right. Like that's always a thankful, grateful interaction there. Thanks for bringing the, and I here are 4 or 5 great things, and here are maybe a couple things that I heard here that could potentially get you more points or whatever. The final thing I wanted to say about the 2 different orgs is the selection of music that we judge with is very indicative of the type of sound that each is looking for. Right.
Yeah.
The Mecha CD is all music, and it has, those tracks are selected to showcase the things that Mecha is looking for.
Absolutely.
And the same thing with the Ayahuasca disc, right?
There's lots of clues.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, if you can play both of them and they both sound fantastic, then score. You've probably got a pretty well-rounded system. But if you focused a lot on specific things, you'll hear those other things come out in listening to the other discs. So that would be some advice I'd give. Another thing, as you mentioned about like knowing the judge or knowing what they're like and all that. So that's why I made an attempt to attend and host these other trainings, is for us as judges be able to talk to as many other judges as possible to kind of build that shared understanding of what we're looking for, so that we're at least all coming from the same place, right?
Right.
So I think that's kind of important as well. I'll tell us a quick competitor story about another organization, neither of the ones that I'm working for now, or we're hosting for now, but where knowing the crowd, even though it resulted in a car that didn't sound as good objectively, still takes home the trophy, right? One of the first few shows that I'd competed in, I went there knowing that this particular set of folks was, really heavy on the low end, or focused on the low end, right? It's got to have impact, it's got to have a bunch of bass, right? So I tune the car that way, and some other folks that are generally Ayahuasca competitors or whatever, I'm like, you want to listen to it? Yeah, it does. Sure, it sounds like crap though. And they're like, you get in, and like, yep, it's it rattles, and it's there's all kinds of, it's just beating your head in with the sub and all this stuff.
Right.
But I guess who took the trophy home that day, because that's what that judge was looking for, right? Yeah, it's about playing the game. It's about putting points on the score sheet, right? And you'll see that difference too a lot in competitors. And there are a couple of different kinds of competitors, I think, right? There are ones that build their car to put points on the score sheet, and there are ones that try to build it to sound as good as it can. And those aren't necessarily the same thing.
Right.
Right. And you can see that in maybe sometimes in the compromises of the build or tuning. If you've built it to put points on the score sheet because you want the trophy, that's one thing, but that may or may not make it sound the best.
Right, absolutely, and there's some things that, like, I think Mark Eldridge's NASCAR is a good example of a vehicle that does some crazy good things that isn't able to show up on the score sheet at an appropriate measure to actually make it win. Yeah, mm-hmm. and I think that's the danger too. We've talked about before, but the danger as well when you as a competitor say, "Well, I listened to all the other cars, and there's no way that car beat mine because it doesn't sound as good as mine." And obviously there's a whole lot of problems with that.
There's a lot to unpack there.
right. Because, there's obviously the confirmation bias that, my car sounds the best because it sounds the best to me. And it's one of those things, well, it immediately goes into conspiracy theories because, as the judges are kind of really the ones who are the athletes of the day. They're the ones, the judges are really kind of the ones who are on display for their ability to separate and sort the cars. And so it makes it kind of easy for the competitor to, regardless of how good or how experienced or how new they are, whomever, to be able to play a armchair role in how it's determined. But I think that's not, when you're judging, and you probably understand this better now than previous, when you're judging, you're really not thinking about all the things that people think you're thinking about. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
by the time you're in the second or third car, it's just like me, the score sheet, what I'm hearing, and what people might think we're thinking as you're judging. I would really encourage them to, even if they are just listening, pick one score sheet with the approved list of music that goes along with that, and sort your songs, and then go listen to 8 cars and do a mock score sheet and see what you come up with. And I think you'll find, even if you're doing that without the full knowledge of what you're supposed to be doing, just going through that process might put you in more of the mindset of what a judge is doing versus what you think they're doing.
Right. And that's the thing with the judging process, right? I have absolutely given the win to a car that I didn't feel sounded the best because it put the points on the score sheet. My job as a judge is to evaluate how well it puts points on the score sheet regardless. So it's one of those things, right? Like as a judge, the process you're going through is each individual category on the score sheet. And how do what I'm hearing translate to these specific points? And as I previously mentioned, that may or may not be the best sounding car.
I've always encouraged somebody, even if you're not going to judge, and even if you think you're not going to gain a great deal from it, I think it's still valuable to go through the judge training process just to understand better how each organization and each judge are approaching the situation. You clearly came into this with a purpose to judge, to promote events, to take it to the next level. So you were approaching it from a very, hey, I'm here to be a judge and to do this job, and I wanted to do it to the best of my ability. But with your competitor hat on, having done that, do you feel that you learned valuable information going through both of those judges trainings that you'd be able to take back and say you weren't going to be a judge tomorrow, you weren't going to do an event, anything else, you were just going to go back and compete? Do you think you gained enough valuable information from that process to be worth it to go back as a competitor and be a better competitor because of it?
Oh, I would absolutely say that. And I would absolutely say that we should, as organizers and event promoters, do more things like what we did at MSE last year with the competitor seminar, which would be like the distilled down version of the part of the judges training that matters to the competitor.
Right.
Because I think there'd be a lot of value in that. You don't need to come sit for 3 days, or whatever to do the full judges training.
Right.
To get that information. And one of the things that I've found most valuable about that at Marks, and then replicated it here with the IASCA training we did, is having a reference system available,
right,
so that competitors, judges, whoever, because a couple of our attendees at the IASCA training were in fact competitors, just come in to get a better idea of how things operate. And having that reference with the media and listening to what the judges are listening for, listening to it on a system that's not a car, because a lot of competitors, their reference is the car, which is, there are a million reasons why that's bad, but, having something where you can sit with judges and listen to what they're listening for and talk about why that's there, and, those kinds of things is invaluable as a competitor.
Absolutely agree. And I think the more we can bring, obviously this year, through a wrench in everybody's plans, but I do think the more we can bring that experience to the competitors as part of an event, and being able to go that the event at MSE, it's very apparent that there is no reference system because obviously when you listen to the 3 different systems that Mark has set up identically in the same building, all 3 of those sound entirely different. So, for anybody to say, oh, we need the reference, here's these magical headphones, or here's these speakers, or here's whatever, it's very apparent that all that is thrown out the window as soon as music starts playing, because every situation is different.
Yeah, and there's no a reference, right? It's
right.
Everyone has a reference, but it's a collection of all of the music they've ever heard on everything they've ever heard it on, right?
Right.
And what their perception of what right sounds like. So if you can have something that's of good quality to listen to things on, chances are you can pick out the same things, right, at that point,
Right.
but there's never a reference.
So, quick update on finals. After last week I kind of put out more details on what we were looking at doing and everything. About the time that episode released, then things went sideways with our plans in Dallas. So we're still working that out. I would say at this point we are more than likely to end up either at an alternative location in Dallas or at Mobile Toys, because we're definitely more COVID proof there. We're more off the map and don't really have to worry about anything else at that point, but we'll see. So right now, jury's still out. That weekend is an absolute. However, where it is in Dallas, or whether it's there or at Mobile Toys, is yet to be determined. So what's going to happen is, as soon as I release this podcast episode, then everything will change, and then I'll have to update again.
Either way, it's still great for me. So I approve.
All right, it's still Texas. So I would say, if you fly into Texas, if you're flying or if you're making plans, don't get a hotel yet. But if at least you're in Dallas by, say, Thursday, then you're pretty much guaranteed to be able to make things happen from there. So, yeah, we're not, I promise nobody is trying to delay anything. It's simply a matter of trying to knock all this down in times that are ever changing. This past weekend, we had an event north of Chicago area at Eschaeology Cubbyland, which was IASCA 1X Mecha 3X, and actually the first IMMA regional event ever. And went really well. We had, I think, 16 or 17 cars altogether. For the most part, I mean, there was 3 or 4 that, kind of picked and chose a little bit, but I think we had 12 or 13 people that did all 3 formats, IMMA, IASCA, and Mecha. And it was actually really kind of take a look, obviously, with the Eschaeologist Award, keeping track of seeing how far people are traveling, because that's part of the points. It was actually one of the few events that I've seen where, everybody kind of traveled a very similar amount. Some events you have like 4 or 5 people that traveled 12 miles to get there, and then you have another set of people that traveled 150, 200 miles, then 4 or 5 people that traveled 600 miles. And in this case, it was maybe a little bit more per person, but I think overall it was actually a little bit lower mileage overall for everybody to get there. So that's the first time we've done an event up there. All the events that we've done in Illinois have been in Bloomington, which is kind of in the more middle part of the state. Obviously, Chicago is kind of more in the extremities, but then Ohio and Wisconsin and Iowa and Indiana, and everybody was kind of able to get there in a very similar fashion. So it worked out really well. Zero issues in terms of, everybody followed the rules well in terms of the COVID stuff, keeping their mask on inside. For the most part, it was actually a pretty nice day. So for the most part, we were outside. It was said before, where I've had issues in my right ear over time just from being sick and that, and having issues with my eustachian tube. And apparently from last year to this year, I lost like 95 pounds now. And apparently when you're obese, fat develops around your ear canal and everything. And then when you have kind of rapid weight loss like I did, that fat goes away, and then your ear doesn't quite know what to do.
So what you're saying is you had a fat head.
Yeah, right. So I had a fat head, and then the fat head went away, and now my ear doesn't know what to do. So keeping it like engaged has been very tough. So I thought, the last time I really judged a lot of cars was Slamology last year around the same time. And so I thought it'd be fine. And I'm not, it was, I don't really have an issue with the feedback or scoring, but it was a long day trying to keep my ear engaged to be able to do it. So yeah, this past week, this is probably the last event I'll judge this past weekend, but I'm glad they're other people like you and others are coming up in the ranks to do so. So it's actually my 14-year-old, well, how old is he now? 15? I guess he's 15 now. Yeah. Well, he just had a birthday like 2 weeks ago, so I was trying to remember if he turned 13 to 14 or 14 to 15. But yeah. Anyway, so my 15-year-old went through judges training, MECA judges training at the same time as Justin and his wife. And so he judged MECA at the show in Georgia a couple months ago. And I mean, nobody shot him. I guess because he was, 14 years old, you can't get too angry at him. But
wow. I mean, I guarantee he's got more hearing range than any of the rest of us.
right. When it comes down to quality hearing, it's just a matter of translating that to a score sheet. But when it comes down to the quality of hearing, he's probably beaten us all.
Yeah, he hasn't abused it all yet. Yeah.
He's had more consistent good references than I did. But yeah. So anyway, I'm thankful for anybody going through judges training right now because we need judges. And some of us are getting old and decrepit and our bodies are falling apart. We can't do anything right anymore.
Yeah.
At least I can still do math. So that's
that's helpful. Yeah.
I know how to do a spreadsheet and use math. So I'm good. I'm good there. Anyways.
Speaking of that, that's, the judges training that we did this spring. I'm intending to, provided the world hasn't burned by then, continue to make that an annual event here. So
awesome.
We can continue to calibrate, every year and make sure we're, as up to date as possible.
Right. No, that's great. I think that's great. This coming weekend, we are doing basically the same thing, the same event. So it's going to be a 1X Iasca and 3X MECA event this weekend in Florence, Alabama at Audio X, which will also be an inaugural event. We have never done an event in Alabama or at Audio X before. In fact, I've never been there. I've been within like 30 minutes of Audio X, but I've actually never been to the shop. So we are going to be there this weekend. I am not judging. Mm-hmm. Yay, tip for everybody. So Aaron Hardison, as we mentioned last week, will be judging. I believe if everything works out, Mr. Hogan will be judging MECA. And then, Mr. Price, you are having an event, September 19?
That is correct.
In Austin again. So that'll be the second. I think this might be the only place this year that has two events in 1 year. And it's going to be the second Austin event of the year. We were there, as mentioned, around the Iasca judges training. Was that
March 1st?
March 1st, yeah. Can't remember if it was February or March. But yeah, it was a week after Freeze.
It was the last weekend of February, first weekend of March. So
gotcha.
Technically both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's why I was like, I had both in my head, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's why. It's been like 17 years since February, so
right. Yes, absolutely. The whole world has caught fire since then.
It seems like an entirely different time. Like, it's crazy.
Well, that was the day. That was the day of the event on that Sunday was the first confirmed case of COVID in the U.S. that same day.
Yeah, because I was traveling in Texas that following week, and we were in San Antonio. I want to say Tuesday or Wednesday of that week, and like the afternoon, we were in San Antonio, and then driving back north, and like 2 or 3 hours after we were in San Antonio, they started shutting down a mall because there was a COVID case that broke.
Yep.
Like there, and there were some travelers that were in San Antonio from a mall at the mall or something, and yeah, and then it just went downhill from there. So anyway, this Austin event will be different than the first. Obviously, I think you've pretty much nailed down all the precautions, but you're going to have scheduled time slots for each class, right?
Yep, we're trying to make it as flexible for people as possible, but still, keep to all the regulations and all that. We do still have some ordinances here and about the number of people that can be in a gathering, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm cutting off the registrations 2 days early, so I can build a map of how I can, put the different things together. One thing to say is it's a bonus point event, except it's not like the way you think it is, right? They're both 2X Iasca and MECA, but basically the first ticket would be a 2x regular 2x ticket, and that actually gets you a free round of the other body, right? So
Okay.
the one ticket gives you a single IASCA entry and a single MECA entry for the price of a single 2x entry, right?
Okay.
And then any additional seats or classes, you'll get that same. You can do them individual classes, in either one if you want. And you'll get the 1x fee for those as well, right? So it's bonus in that way, as it's if you absolutely don't want to stay for the other org or whatever, you don't have to, but it's included as part of it's included for free as part of the ticket. So, and then we'll do time classes, time blocks free. We'll do depending on how many entries we have, like we'll have the first group 4 or 5 cars or whatever, and then get them in, start that judging process, and then half an hour later or whatever, bring another set in, and that way it gives people flexibility. Like if you want to stay out of, hang out in the parking lot outside or whatever, you can. If you want to leave and get out, you can, so that we can keep the gatherings to a minimum, let people that are more concerned or more vulnerable or whatever, they can go ahead and get out and be minimal exposure, and then we'll continue to do that. We've got a really reasonably short time window, so we'll actually have, I think, 4 judges for this, just so we can get everybody in and out in 6 hours.
And then you're doing this basically at night, right? You're starting like 4 o'clock on Saturday and then go until 10.
Yeah, and that's because of some scheduling stuff with the judges that are going to be working. So, but
I think it's actually kind of cool. I mean, I think. At least not on purpose. Maybe at Aggieland a couple times it's turned into a night event, but I don't think I've ever really done an evening or night event on purpose. But I think that's a pretty cool concept on its own, especially with the heat and everything else. And this time of year, I think it's a good time.
Yeah. That's a huge part of it, is getting it cooled down. Starting to get it cooled down a little bit, so we're not out in the blistering sun all day here in Texas in the summer.
Right. And it's a Tent World again, same location we had it in March, right?
Yep, that is correct. Yep. Unless it so that I guess that's another thing that I will say. Right now, I've limited it to 25 entries because that's all that Tent World will support. If we sell all of those out and people still want to come, then I have an alternate venue that's slightly bigger as well that we could potentially move to, but there's a cost associated with it, so I'm not going to do that unless we need to.
I gotcha. Yeah, kind of build it as it grows.
Right.
I would guess that you'll probably be fine with 2025 there this time of year. And then you're doing all the feedback and everything via score sheet that will be sent to them later with their trophy if applicable, correct?
Yep, and I promise all the feedback will be transcribed to text, not chicken scratch, so that you'll actually be able to read it. The judges' emails and phone numbers will be attached to it, so if you have questions, we're doing standard certificate awards, and those will be mailed out as well. We'll do a Facebook Live thing to announce results like the Parkinson's one was.
Right. Perfect. Awesome. Well, sounds cool. I wish you best of luck with that. I'm sure you won't need it, but if anybody wants to get tickets to that, or obviously show that they're planning to attend, if they want to do that, you can do that just by going to the SQology Facebook page, look under the events, and the link is there for the tickets as well, or you can message us or email or whatever, and we can get you the link if you're not on Facebook. But that's all publicly. Even if you don't have an Facebook account, you can still access that information fairly easily via the SQology Facebook page, which is just facebook.com/SQology. And then just go to events, and it is there. Again, it's September 19th on a Saturday. It starts at 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock. The tickets and pre-registration are required because of what Jeremy just said. And I think should be a good event. We had a fair number of people there in March, and obviously not everybody was expecting that to be their only event. So,
right. If only we would have known that.
If only we had been able to sell it as this is going to be the only event. It's this until finals, and by the way, finals is going to be in Texas.
Yeah, no one would have believed you if you'd have said that.
Right. The whole world is going to go insane. This is your one event for the year. This event in Hutto, Texas, and you'll have a chance of finals because it's going to be in Texas. So be there or be square.
Everybody must go.
Anyway, Jeremy, I certainly appreciate your time. Appreciate you discussing things. Like I said, I think your perspective is great, being the amount of time and effort and energy that you've really put into this over the past year. And I'm sure we were all hoping and dreaming and planning for a different outcome for this year with you doing making all those efforts. But
yeah, just leave it to me to try and do something, and then the whole kind of catch the whole world on fire.
Right.
It's fine.
Jeremy shall not take over cardio this year. He has to wait till next year.
Right.
So anyway, I appreciate it, sir, and we will talk soon.
All right, man. Have a good one. Thanks for having me.